Traffic screeched to a halt on a California highway when a confused old man stood frozen between lanes, clutching a crumpled map. Drivers honked, swerved, and yelled until one motorcycle stopped. Keanu Reeves stepped off and walked straight into danger. What he discovered about the man's past would leave the entire nation in tears. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The afternoon sun blazed over Southern California, turning the asphalt of Interstate 10 into a mirror of heat and glare. The air shimmered, and the hum of engines created a restless, unbroken roar. Commuters rushed home, windows rolled up, air conditioners blasting, minds locked on deadlines and detours. No one noticed the figure at first, just a shadow on the road, a blur between the lanes. Then the horns began. A frail old man stood in the middle of the freeway, clutching a crumpled map that flapped helplessly in the wind. His shirt was tucked neatly into his slacks, but his hands trembled, and his hat sat crooked on his head. He turned one way, then another, as if expecting familiar houses to appear where only speeding cars screamed past. Drivers swerved, brakes screeched, and angry voices echoed from rolled-down windows. "Get off the road, old man," someone yelled, but he didn't seem to hear. He simply stared at the faded map as if it held the key to a lost life. His lips moved silently. The world around him blurred into chaos. Then, from the distance, the low rumble of a motorcycle broke through the noise. A deep, steady sound that seemed to move against the tide of confusion. The bike slowed, sleek and black against the bright haze. The rider eased to a stop on the shoulder, gloved hands gripping the handlebars with calm precision. He removed his helmet, and the crowd of honking drivers stared in disbelief. It was Keanu Reeves. For a brief moment, time seemed to pause. A few people recognized him instantly, phones half raised, unsure whether to film or help. But Keanu didn't hesitate. He stepped off the motorcycle, his boots crunching against gravel, his movements slow and deliberate. The wind lifted his hair as he walked into traffic, one hand raised to stop the cars still inching forward. Drivers lowered their windows, stunned into silence. The man in the middle of the road was still frozen, the map shaking in his grasp. His lips quivered as he whispered something only he could hear. Keanu approached slowly, his voice low but firm. "Sir, are you all right?" The old man turned toward him, eyes glassy, unfocused. For a second, fear flashed across his face, then confusion, then relief. I'm going home," he said weakly, "but I can't find the turn." Keanu's gaze fell to the paper in the man's hand. It wasn't just old, it was ancient. The roads drawn in pencil didn't match the city he knew. Names of neighborhoods long gone, highways that no longer existed. The man was lost in more ways than one. Behind them, the roar of traffic returned. A woman in a minivan called out, "Is he okay?" Someone else shouted, "Should we call 911? But Keanu didn't answer. He placed a reassuring hand on the man's shoulder, guiding him toward the edge of the road. His movements were gentle, the way one might guide a child through a storm. Once they reached the safety of the shoulder, the man's knees gave out. Keanu helped him sit on the curb, his breathing shallow but steady. He crouched beside him, sweat glistening on his brow, but his voice remained calm. "What's your name, sir?" The man blinked, looking down at the map again, as if the answer might be written there. "Walter," he said at last. "Walter Pierce. I was trying to find home. My wife's waiting." Keanu nodded slowly, a quiet ache settling in his chest. The man's suit was neatly pressed, but worn thin. His shoes were scuffed, the soles cracked. The map in his hands bore the creases of decades. "All right, Walter," Keanu said softly. "You're safe now. Let's get you somewhere cool." A driver nearby stepped out of her car, filming without thinking. The camera caught Keanu's steady hands, his calm presence, the quiet dignity in the way he knelt beside a stranger. But to Keanu, the phones didn't exist. The traffic didn't exist. There was only the trembling man beside him, lost between the past and the present, and a feeling in his gut that told him this was more than chance. He helped Walter stand. The old man leaned on him for balance, still clutching the map like a lifeline. The wind picked up, scattering loose papers and dust across the highway. Keanu looked around for an exit, then led him toward his car parked nearby. As they walked, Walter spoke again, his voice thin and cracked. "It used to be right here, the road to our house." The roses were red, and the gate was white. Keanu said nothing. He didn't need to. They reached the motorcycle. Walter stopped to look at it, his expression suddenly bright. "That's a fine machine," he said with a faint smile. "My boy had one like that. A Honda, I think. He used to take me for rides when he came home from college." Keanu returned the smile. "Yeah? Must have been good times." Walter nodded faintly, then his face fell. "He doesn't visit much now. Says I forget too many things." Keanu's throat tightened. The highway buzzed around them, but in that moment, the sound felt distant, like a memory fading into silence. He opened the car door and helped Walter inside, careful not to startle him. The old man gripped the seatbelt with trembling hands. The heat had drained the color from his face, but his eyes held something fragile hope. Keanu shut the door gently and leaned against the frame, studying the map once more. The paper smelled of dust and time. He saw the date printed in the corner, 1972. Half the streets didn't exist anymore. "Home," Walter murmured again, tracing a finger across the faded ink. "It's supposed to be right here." Keanu looked out at the horizon, where the desert met the city skyline. He didn't know yet where this road would lead, but something inside him whispered that turning away wasn't an option. He folded the map carefully, placed it on Walter's lap, and started the engine. "All right," Keanu said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. "Let's go find your home." The black car merged back onto the highway, leaving behind the chaos and the cameras. And as the sun dipped lower in the sky, the story of that small act of kindness, of a man who stopped for a stranger, was already beginning to travel farther than either of them could imagine. Keanu guided the car off the highway, heart still pounding from the chaos behind them. The old man sat quietly. Beside him, eyes fixed on the folded map, his fingers tracing the faded roads like a ritual. Outside, sirens wailed faintly in the distance, growing softer as they drove farther away. "Thank you," Walter whispered suddenly. "I didn't mean to cause trouble. I just needed to find my way home." Keanu glanced at him. "You didn't cause trouble. You just got turned around." Walter's gaze drifted out the window. The sunlight flickered across his face, revealing deep lines etched by time. He looked peaceful now, but beneath that calm lingered a fragile uncertainty, as if every memory could slip away at any moment. At a red light, Keanu glanced again at the map on Walter's lap. The paper was torn, edges browned with age. He could almost smell the years on it. He didn't yet know why he had stopped, or why he couldn't just hand the man to authorities. All he knew was that something about this stranger's lost look felt hauntingly familiar, as if fate itself had waved him. Down in the middle of the road, the light turned green, and the hum of traffic carried them forward. Keanu drove slowly, careful not to startle Walter, who now hummed a tune under his breath. Soft, uncertain, from another decade, the melody faded into the air, like smoke. "Do you remember where your home might be?" Keanu asked gently. Walter hesitated, eyes narrowing as if chasing thoughts across fog. "It was near some orange trees. Pasadena, maybe. My wife, Margaret, used to keep roses by the gate. She'd wait for me every evening." Keanu nodded, letting the silence stretch. The man's words trembled with love and loss. A few miles ahead, Keanu pulled into a gas station. He parked near the shade, turned off the engine, and offered Walter a bottle of cold water. The old man took it gratefully, his hands shaking. Keanu unfolded the map once more, studying it beneath the harsh sunlight. The paper disintegrated at the folds, revealing street names long erased from modern maps. Yet something in Walter's tone made Keanu believe that home wasn't just a place, it was a memory, fragile but alive. He started the engine again, quietly determined. "All right, Walter," he said. "Let's go find those roses." The air inside the car was thick with heat and silence. Walter sat quietly in the passenger seat, his frail hands resting on the folded map like it was something sacred. His tie was slightly crooked, and his white shirt clung to his back. Every few seconds, he would glance out the window, as if the passing landscape might suddenly turn into something familiar. Keanu handed him a bottle of water. "Here, drink a little. You'll feel better." Walter smiled faintly, but hesitated before twisting the cap. His eyes darted nervously toward the road behind them. "They might be looking for me," he whispered. "The people from that place." Keanu frowned slightly. "What place, Walter?" The one with the white walls," Walter said. "They said I had to stay there, but Margaret's waiting. I promised her I'd come home before supper." Keanu's chest tightened. The words came from somewhere deep inside Walter's fractured memory. He could tell the old man truly believed his wife was still alive, waiting at some familiar doorstep that time had already erased. "It's all right," Keanu said gently. "You're not in trouble. Let's just take a drive for now." Walter nodded, his shoulders relaxing just a little. He took a slow sip of water, then looked down at the map again. "It's funny," he murmured. "The streets don't look right anymore." Keanu leaned closer, studying the faded paper. The names were handwritten in neat blue ink: Monterey Road, Arroyo Street, Hastings Ranch Boulevard, but some of them didn't exist anymore. He noticed the year printed faintly in the corner, 1972. No wonder nothing made sense. Keanu reached for his phone to call the police, but stopped when Walter suddenly grabbed his wrist. "Please don't," he said, eyes wide with fear. "They'll take me away again. I just need to find my way home. Please." The desperation in his voice was raw and childlike. It wasn't anger or confusion, it was terror. Keanu nodded slowly. "Okay, Walter. No police. We'll figure this out together." The old man's grip loosened, and he let out a shaky breath. For the first time since they met, his expression softened into something like trust. Keanu started the engine. The car hummed quietly as they merged back onto the road. The freeway stretched before them like an endless ribbon of light and shadow. Walter turned toward the window, the wind brushing against his thin gray hair. For a long while, neither of them spoke. The sound of the tires on asphalt became their only language. Walter began humming a slow, old-fashioned tune, a melody Keanu recognized but couldn't name. Something from the 1950 seconds, maybe. As they drove, Keanu studied him out of the corner of his eye. Walter's gaze drifted over the horizon, sometimes pausing, sometimes lost. There was a certain peace to him now, as if movement itself soothed the chaos in his mind. Keanu spoke softly. "That song you were humming, what's it called?" Walter blinked, then smiled faintly. "Moon River. Margaret used to play it on the record player every Sunday morning. She'd hum along while cooking breakfast. The house always smelled like coffee and cinnamon." The mention of those small details made Keanu's throat tighten. He could almost picture it, the sunlight, the music, the warmth of another time. Walter turned to him, his eyes glistening. "You know, I used to be a school teacher. 5th grade. I taught kids about history and geography. Maps like this one," he said, tapping the faded paper on his lap. "Funny how I can teach everyone else where they are, but forget where I belong." Keanu glanced at him, a faint smile on his lips. Maybe we just get lost sometimes. Doesn't mean we can't find our way again. Walter nodded, looking thoughtful. Maybe so. They passed signs for Pasadena, the name sparking recognition in Walter's eyes. He straightened slightly in his seat. That's it, Pasadena. I remember that. Keanu slowed the car. All right, he said quietly. Let's see what we can find. The city stretched ahead like a memory, half-awake old houses mixed with new ones. Gardens where there used to be open fields. And street names that had shifted with time. Walter leaned closer to the window, whispering directions that didn't quite make sense. Turn left. No, right by the church. Or maybe it was a grocery store. Keanu followed his instinct more than the words. He drove slowly, giving Walter time to search the landscape for something familiar. The confusion in the man's eyes broke his heart. Yet there was something profoundly human about his persistence. The road twisted between palm-lined streets, past brick homes and corner stores, until the sun began to dip low over the hills. Keanu glanced at Walter again. Does anything look familiar? Walter squinted at the horizon. It used to be different, he said quietly. The air smelled sweeter back then. Keanu didn't know what to say, so he just kept driving. The highway behind them shimmered with heat, fading into gold as the day wore on. Inside the car, the old map lay open across Walter's knees. A fragile bridge between two worlds, one that still existed in his heart, and another that had long since moved on. Keanu turned down a quieter street lined with sycamore trees. The noise of the freeway faded behind them, replaced by the rhythmic whir of passing tires and birds overhead. Walter's eyes darted from one house to another. Some moments, his face lit up with a flicker of recognition. Others, he sank back into uncertainty. That one looks like ours, he said suddenly, pointing toward a small yellow house with white shutters. But as they drew closer, he frowned. No, the porch was different. Margaret had flowers there. Roses. Red ones. Keanu slowed, letting him take his time. He noticed how Walter's hand trembled slightly on the map, how his lips moved as if repeating the directions he once knew by heart. Walter, Keanu asked gently, when was the last time you were home? The old man's expression faltered. I don't know. Last Christmas, maybe? Or was it before she passed? It's all mixed up. Keanu's chest ached. The world outside seemed to rush forward, but for Walter, time had stopped somewhere long ago. Don't worry, Keanu said quietly. We'll find it together. Walter turned to him, tears glinting at the corners of his eyes. You're a good man, son. You remind me of my boy, always helping, never asking why. Keanu smiled faintly. Maybe that's what we're supposed to do. The evening light softened over Pasadena as Keanu continued driving through the narrow streets. The neighborhood grew older, quieter houses with cracked driveways and mailboxes faded by the sun. Walter leaned closer to the window, breathing faster, as if something just beyond his reach waited there. I used to walk this street every morning, he whispered. Margaret would wave from the window while I went to school. The kids would shout my name. Mr. Pierce, they'd call me that. He chuckled softly, then his voice broke. I can still hear them. Keanu nodded, keeping his eyes on the road. The sincerity in Walter's tone filled the car with a strange tenderness. They passed a closed bakery, its old sign barely legible. Walter squinted. That used to be Clark's Bakery. Best cinnamon rolls in town. Margaret loved them. It's still there, Keanu said, even though he knew it wasn't. He just wanted Walter to have that small comfort. Walter smiled faintly and went quiet for a moment. Then, in a trembling voice, he said, You know, I used to fix watches. Every little tick meant something. You stop listening long enough, and time runs away. Keanu glanced at him, feeling the weight of those words. Maybe time doesn't run, he said softly. Maybe it waits for moments like this. Walter nodded slowly, his gaze unfocused but peaceful. The car rolled past another row of aging homes as the last of the sunlight stretched across the windshield. For a fleeting second, Keanu thought he saw Walter relax completely, as though he'd finally found a piece of his past in the fading glow of the evening. And deep inside, Keanu knew they were only at the beginning of finding what Walter truly needed to remember. The sun was beginning to dip behind the hills when Keanu pulled into a small diner off Colorado Boulevard. Its neon sign flickered faintly, half the letters missing. But inside, warm yellow light spilled through the windows, the kind of place where time seemed to pause for everyone who entered. Walter looked exhausted, his head leaning slightly toward the glass as the car came to a stop. "This place looks familiar," he murmured. Keanu smiled faintly. "Maybe you came here once." He helped Walter out of the car and guided him through the door. The bell above it jingled, cutting through the soft hum of old country music. A waitress behind the counter looked up and froze for a second when she realized who had just walked in. Her eyes widened, then softened into disbelief. "You're..." she started, but Keanu gave her a gentle shake of the head. He nodded toward Walter, who stood beside him, holding his map like a passport to another lifetime. "He needs a seat," Keanu said quietly, "and maybe a slice of pie." The waitress, her name tag read. Lynn blinked, then nodded quickly. "Of course. Sit anywhere you like." They chose a booth by the window. Walter's movements were slow and careful, like a man trying to remember how to belong somewhere. The waitress poured 2 cups of coffee without asking. The smell filled the air, strong, comforting, familiar. Walter stared at the steam curling from his cup. "She used to make coffee every morning," he said softly. "Real beans. None of that instant stuff. Margaret always said life was too short for shortcuts." Keanu listened, elbows resting on the table, giving him his full attention. The waitress returned with 2 slices of apple pie. "On the house," she said, placing the plates down. Keanu thanked her quietly. Walter smiled faintly, his eyes glimmering with gratitude. He took a small bite and closed his eyes. "Haven't had pie like this since, must have been years ago. We used to come to a place just like this after church." Margaret always wanted the corner seat. Keanu let the silence settle between them. The hum of the diner, the clink of forks, the soft murmur of other customers. It all felt strangely distant, as if the world had slowed down to let Walter's memories breathe. After a few moments, Keanu asked gently, "Walter, do you remember your address? Maybe there's something on that map we can check." Walter nodded and turned the map over. On the back, in faded ink, was a scribbled note, barely legible, but still there. A street name, Hastings Road, and beneath it, a number. Keanu tilted it toward the light. "Looks like Hastings Road. That's in Pasadena, right?" "Yeah, there's still a Hastings Road, but most of those old houses got rebuilt years ago." Walter looked up suddenly, hopeful. "Rebuilt?" Lynn nodded. "Yeah, but I can look it up if you want." She pulled out her phone and started searching. "There's a listing for a new development there, but maybe some of the neighbors are the same." Walter reached across the table, his hand trembling slightly. "Would you?" he asked. "Please?" She smiled gently. "Of course, honey." Keanu watched the exchange in silence. There was something beautiful about how naturally people responded when compassion took the lead. Fame didn't matter in that booth. Only humanity did. A few minutes later, Lynn turned her screen toward them. "This is it, I think. Hastings Road, near Sierra Madre. It's only 15 minutes from here." Walter's eyes filled with tears. That's home," he whispered. Keanu placed a steady hand on his arm. "Then that's where we'll go." Outside, the sky had begun to shift. The air carried a strange coolness, the kind that hinted at rain, a rare visitor in this part of California. Keanu helped Walter to his feet, the crumpled map now tucked safely in his pocket. As they stepped outside, a few light drops began to fall, dotting the asphalt. Walter looked up, smiling softly. Margaret loved the rain. She used to say it made everything remember itself again. Keanu looked at him, the words lingering like a gentle echo. He didn't know yet how true they would become. Rain began to tap against the windshield as Keanu and Walter sat quietly in the parked car outside the diner. The rhythmic patter filled the silence between them, soft and cleansing. Keanu started the engine, and the wipers brushed away the mist gathering on the glass. Walter stared out into the dim street, eyes distant but calm. "Funny thing," he said softly. "I used to tell my students that rain was nature's way of remembering. It washes away what's forgotten, leaves only what matters." Keanu glanced at him. "That's beautiful," he said. "You really were a teacher, huh?" Walter smiled faintly. 37 years, 5th grade. They kept me around because I fixed all the clocks in the school." He chuckled quietly, though his voice trembled. "The kids said I made time behave." Keanu's chest tightened at the thought. "And what about your wife?" "Margaret?" Walter's gaze softened. "Met her at a community dance. She wore a blue dress. I stepped on her foot during the waltz, and she laughed so hard I forgot the steps. She said I looked nervous, but I told her I just didn't want to fall in love too quickly." A smile crept across Keanu's face. "And did you?" Walter looked out at the rain again. "Oh, I fell right then. Spent the next 50 years trying to deserve her." His eyes glistened as he spoke. "She used to plant roses by the porch, red ones. Even now, I swear I can smell them." Keanu said nothing. He didn't want to disturb the fragile peace of that memory. The rain grew heavier, streaking the glass in glistening lines. Walter sighed. After she passed, everything got quiet. Too quiet. The clocks stopped ticking. I guess I just kept walking, hoping I'd hear one of them start again. Keanu tightened his grip on the steering wheel, his thoughts sinking into silence. He knew that kind of emptiness, the kind where time still moves, but your heart doesn't. He looked at Walter, his voice steady but gentle. "Then let's find the sound again, Walter. Let's see where those roses used to bloom." The rain eased into a light drizzle as Keanu guided the car through Pasadena's quiet neighborhoods. Streetlights flickered to life, painting golden streaks across the wet pavement. Walter sat with the map open again, tracing invisible lines with his finger. The streets outside shimmered, distorted by the raindrops. Keanu slowed near an intersection. "We're close," he said softly. "Do you remember anything around here?" Walter squinted through the window. "It's changed. So much glass now, so many lights. It used to be quieter, simpler." His voice faltered, then steadied. "But the hills, yes, those hills look familiar. Margaret and I used to walk near them every Sunday after church." They stopped at a red light. Walter leaned forward, pressing his palm against the window. "There. See that old church? The roof used to be red. We got married there." His voice broke into a whisper. "That was the happiest day of my life." Keanu followed his gaze. The church still stood, though weathered and modernized. He could almost imagine the echo of bells, the laughter of guests, long gone. Walter smiled weakly. "She looked so beautiful. I never thought I'd deserve someone like her." Keanu parked near the curb, letting the engine idle. "You must have been a good man to keep her that happy." "I tried, but after she passed, I didn't know how to live without her. I started forgetting things, birthdays, faces, even my own house. It's like my mind packed up before I did." Keanu looked at him, seeing not just an old man, but a lifetime compressed into fragments. "You didn't forget." he said quietly. You just held on too tightly. Sometimes love does that. Walter blinked, his expression softening. The rain stopped completely. Outside, the pavement reflected the church lights like a mirror of time. Keanu restarted the car. Come on, he said gently. Let's go find where those roses used to bloom. Walter nodded slowly, and for the first time that evening, a calm smile spread across his face. The city lights blurred behind them as they drove deeper into the heart of Pasadena, chasing a memory neither man was ready to let fade. The sky was pale gray by the time Keanu and Walter reached Hastings Road. The drizzle had faded, leaving behind a cool hush that clung to the air. They slowed in front of a house that sat at the end of a newly paved cul-de-sac. Its design was modern, sleek lines, tall glass windows, stone driveway, but to Walter, it was a stranger, wearing the face of his past. He leaned forward, pressing a trembling hand against the dashboard. That's it, he whispered. That's where it should be. Our home. Keanu parked at the curb. The old man's voice was filled with both hope and disbelief. As they stepped out, Walter's eyes darted from the front yard to the porch, searching for any trace of what once was. But there were no rose bushes, no white gate, no weathered porch swing, only trimmed hedges and an electric car in the driveway. He stood frozen on the sidewalk, the sound of passing traffic distant, as if the world had dimmed around him. His lips quivered, and the map in his hands slipped slightly. They took it, he murmured. They took everything. Keanu walked beside him, gently steadying his shoulder. Easy, Walter, he said softly. Maybe someone nearby remembers. Let's ask around. Walter nodded faintly, but his gaze never left the house. The front door opened suddenly. A woman stepped out, holding a small dog. She looked to be in her late 50s, hair tied back neatly, a curious but cautious expression on her face. Can I help you? She called out. Keanu raised a hand in greeting. Sorry to bother you, he said. My friend here used to live in this neighborhood a long time ago. He thinks this might have been his home. The woman's eyes softened when she saw Walter. His frail frame, his trembling hands, the lost look in his eyes, it all told a story. She stepped closer. Oh my goodness, she said quietly. Are you Walter Pierce? Walter's head turned sharply toward her. You remember me? The woman smiled warmly, tears already forming. Of course, I'm Maria Delgado. My parents lived 2 houses down. I used to play in your yard when I was little. You and your wife, Margaret, you always had the prettiest roses. Walter blinked, emotion flooding his face. Maria Delgado? He whispered, his voice breaking. You were the one who used to chase our cat through the bushes. She laughed softly, covering her mouth. That's right. I broke one of Margaret's flower pots once, and you told me it was just a pot, not a heart. I never forgot that. Keanu stood quietly, watching the scene unfold. Walter's posture shifted from disbelief to fragile joy. He took a small step toward her. So it's really gone? The house? Maria nodded gently. Yes. It was torn down about 12 years ago. The new owners rebuilt from the ground up. But I still remember the old place. The white fence, the porch swing, the smell of roses in the morning. Walter's eyes glistened as he clutched his chest. His breathing hitched, and Keanu quickly steadied him, guiding him to the curb. Easy, Walter. Take a breath. Maria hurried inside and returned with a chair and a glass of water. She placed them beside him. I'm so sorry, she said softly. I didn't mean to upset you. Walter shook his head weakly. No, you didn't upset me. I thought if I could see it again, I'd feel home. Keanu crouched beside him. You found a piece of it, he said. Right here. The rain had stopped completely now, leaving small puddles that reflected the glow of the streetlights. Walter sat quietly on the chair Maria had brought, the sound of the wind brushing through the trees. He looked at the modern house before him, but in his eyes, the ghosts of his memories were still standing where walls used to be. "Margaret used to stand by that window," he whispered. "She'd wave when I came home from school. I can almost see her apron, the one with the yellow flowers." Maria's voice was gentle. She was kind to everyone. "When my father passed, she brought food for a week straight. And you fixed our clock when it broke. Said no one should live with a silent clock." Walter smiled faintly, tears wetting his cheeks. "I guess I said a lot of things I meant." Keanu stood beside him, one hand resting lightly on his shoulder. "You did, Walter. You made people remember you." Maria looked between them, her expression softening even more. "When the neighborhood changed, we all wondered what happened to you. The old place went quiet after Margaret died. Then one day, your sons came to clear the house. They said you'd moved to a care home." Walter frowned in confusion. "My sons?" Maria hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Yes, James and Michael, right? They said you'd started forgetting things, that they wanted to make sure you were safe." Walter's eyes darted away, his lips trembling. "Safe," he repeated softly. "They said it was for my own good." He lowered his head, staring at his hands. "But they didn't understand. I wasn't lost, I just wanted to go home." The silence that followed was heavy, fragile. Keanu felt it press against his chest. He'd seen loneliness before, but this was different. This was a loneliness shaped by time itself. Maria knelt in front of Walter, her tone kind and warm. "They love you, Walter. They were scared for you. We all were." Walter looked up, his eyes red, but glimmering with a faint smile. "I suppose I made it hard for them. Always walking, always looking." Keanu crouched down beside him. "Maybe you were looking for something the rest of us forget to look for." Walter tilted his head. "What's that?" "Peace," Keanu said quietly. "And maybe forgiveness." The old man took a deep, shaky breath. "Maybe so." He looked back at the house, his expression softening. "I guess home isn't made of walls after all. It's made of people like her, like Margaret." Maria's eyes filled again. "She'd be proud of you, you know. You never stopped loving her." Walter smiled faintly. "I don't think love ever stops. It just forgets where to stand." Keanu glanced up at the house once more. Behind the love, modern glass. A family's silhouettes moved, children laughing, a woman cooking. The life that had replaced Walter's was still growing, unaware of the story that had come before. He turned back to Maria. "Thank you for remembering him." She shook her head softly. "Some people are impossible to forget." Walter reached out, taking her hand gently. "Thank you, Maria." Maria squeezed his hand back, whispering, "Welcome home, Mr. Pierce." For the first time that night, Walter didn't correct her. He just closed his eyes, breathing in the faint scent of rain and roses that only he could still smell. Maria insisted that Walter rest a little longer before leaving. She brought out a blanket from her house, wrapping it around his shoulders as he sat quietly on the porch steps of what had once been his home. The night was calm now, the earlier rain leaving a crisp freshness in the air. The faint scent of jasmine drifted from a nearby garden, and for a brief moment, it almost felt like the world had turned gentle again. Keanu sat beside him in silence. He didn't try to fill the space with words. He simply let Walter breathe. Every so often, the old man would glance at the modern house, and Keanu could see the flicker of reflection in his eyes, grief and gratitude intertwined. Walter finally spoke, his voice quiet but steady. "I used to fix watches in that garage. Margaret would bring me lemonade, and we'd sit there talking about nothing at all. Funny how the smallest things stay, while everything else fades." Keanu nodded. Maybe that's the real home we carry. Walter, the small things. Walter smiled faintly. You're right. The sound of her laugh, the way the light hit the roses in the morning. That's still here somewhere. He tapped his chest lightly. They can't rebuild that. Maria stood at the edge of the driveway, watching them with soft eyes. You should visit again, she said gently. If you ever want to talk, I'll be here. Walter looked at her gratefully. Thank you, Maria. You've given me something back I thought I'd lost. As they prepared to leave, Walter turned one last time toward the house. The porch light glowed warmly, and for an instant, he seemed to see the past layered over the present. Margaret standing at the door, smiling. Keanu opened the car door for him, helping him inside. When he settled into the seat, Walter whispered, She's not gone, you know. I can feel her still waiting, just not here. Keanu met his eyes through the dim light. Then, maybe tonight, you found what she wanted you to remember. Walter nodded slowly, closing his eyes as they drove away. Behind them, the house faded into the distance, but the memory of love stayed bright and unbroken. The car rolled through the quiet Pasadena streets, headlights gliding over puddles that mirrored the fading sky. Keanu glanced at Walter, who sat with his hands folded over the map, breathing slowly. The old man looked exhausted, not just from the drive, but from the weight of memory itself. Keanu hesitated before speaking. Walter, how about a stop before we head back? There's a place not far from here, somewhere peaceful. Walter looked at him with tired eyes, but managed a faint smile. Peaceful sounds nice. A few minutes later, they pulled into the small community park. The gates were open, the lamps glowing soft amber through the misty air. The faint melody of carousel music drifted through the distance, a tune that seemed to belong to another century. Walter straightened in his seat, his eyes widening. I know that sound. Keanu turned to him. You've been here before? Walter nodded slowly, a light flickering across his face. I used to bring my boys here when they were little. James loved the horses, but Michael always wanted the lion. He said it made him brave. They got out of the car, the ground still damp beneath their feet. The park smelled faintly of rain and popcorn. Families were scattered along the benches, children laughing as the carousel turned under strings of glowing bulbs. Walter walked closer, his movements slow but deliberate, as if each step brushed against a piece of his past. Keanu stood beside him, watching the way his expression changed, how confusion gave way to wonder. You want to go closer? He asked. Walter chuckled softly. Only if you don't mind being seen with an old man chasing ghosts. Keanu smiled. Ghosts don't scare me. They walked toward the carousel, the music growing louder, the gentle waltz of painted horses spinning under colored lights. Keanu bought 2 tickets and handed one to Walter. The old man stared at it for a long moment, then laughed quietly. Haven't held one of these in decades. Then today's a good day to start again, Keanu said. They climbed onto the ride, Walter choosing the golden lion with the chipped paint. As the carousel began to move, he gripped the pole tightly but smiled wide, the kind of smile that belonged to someone much younger. Keanu rode beside him, the lights circling around them in slow rhythm. Walter's laughter echoed through the cool evening air, genuine, free, and filled with the innocence of memory. For a moment, time folded back, and it was as if the years between then and now had never passed. When the carousel stopped, Walter climbed down carefully. His eyes were bright again, alive. I can't remember the last time I felt this young, he said, breathless but happy. Keanu grinned. That's what happens when you go back to where the good things started. Walter nodded slowly, looking around at the families nearby. It's strange, seeing life move on. But I guess that's the point. The world keeps spinning, even when we forget the tune. Keanu looked out over the carousel as the next round began. Yeah, he said softly. But sometimes, if we listen closely, we remember the rhythm. As the carousel music faded into the hum of the park, Keanu guided Walter toward a nearby bench. The air had cooled, and streaks of violet stretched across the sky. A few children still ran through puddles, their laughter blending with the rustle of trees. Walter sighed softly as he sat down. "You know," he said, "I used to buy my boys cotton candy from that same cart." He pointed toward a vendor just a few yards away, where pink and blue clouds spun slowly on metal sticks. They'd fight over who got the bigger one. Margaret used to scold them, but she'd end up taking a bite from both. Keanu smiled. "Sounds like a good memory." Walter looked down, his fingers trembling slightly. "It's strange. The small things stay, but the big things, birthdays, holidays, even names, sometimes they slip away. But I still remember their laughter. I remember her hands." Without a word, Keanu stood and walked to the vendor. He returned with 2 sticks of cotton candy, one pink, one blue. He handed the pink one to Walter, who looked at it like it was a treasure from his past. "Well, I'll be," Walter said with a chuckle. "Didn't think I'd ever taste this again." He took a bite, his expression softening. "Still sweet," he murmured. "Maybe even sweeter now." Keanu sat beside him, tearing off a piece from his own. "You know," he said quietly, "I think life's funny like that. The things we lose always find new ways to come back." "I think that's how love works too." A long silence followed. The sky turned a deeper shade of gold as the sun dipped behind the trees. Keanu glanced at Walter, whose face was peaceful now, the earlier confusion replaced by a kind of serene exhaustion. He took out his phone discreetly and stepped a few feet away, speaking in a low voice. "Hi, this is Keanu Reeves," he said. "I'm with a man named Walter Pierce. He seems to have wandered from his care home. He's safe now, but I could use some advice on the best way to help him without scaring him." The voice on the other end was calm and understanding. "We can contact his family and the local Alzheimer's unit. If he's comfortable, keep him somewhere familiar until we arrange someone to meet you. And thank you for staying with him." Keanu ended the call, sliding the phone back into his pocket. When he turned, Walter was watching the carousel again, the soft lights flickering in his eyes. Keanu sat back down. "You doing okay?" Walter smiled faintly. "Better than I've been in a long time. You've got a steady presence, son. Don't lose that." Keanu's tone was gentle. "I'll try not to." For a while, they sat together in silence, listening to the soft hum of the carousel and the distant chirp of crickets beginning to sing. The park lights flickered on, casting halos across the wet grass. Walter leaned back, his breathing steady but slow. "You remind me of my boy," he said, almost to himself. James always had the same calm about him. Never raised his voice, just listened. "You've got that." Keanu's gaze lowered slightly. "Maybe we all remind someone of somebody," he said quietly. The words carried more weight than he expected. Walter nodded, his eyes half closed. "That's a comforting thought." Keanu watched as the old man rested, his head tilting slightly to the side, a soft smile still lingering on his lips. For the first time since that day began, Walter looked truly at peace. The carousel music played on, slow and tender, spinning its endless loop beneath the California twilight. The park grew quieter as night settled in, the laughter of children fading into the distant hum of traffic. The carousel lights dimmed one by one until only the soft glow of the street lamps remained. Walter stirred slightly, opening his eyes as Keanu draped his jacket over his shoulders. "Did I fall asleep?" Walter asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Just a little," Keanu replied. "It's strange. When I sleep these days, I don't dream much anymore. But tonight, I saw her, Margaret. She was standing under the carousel lights, waving." Keanu's expression softened. "Maybe she's happy you came back here." Walter nodded slowly, eyes glistening. She didn't say anything. She just looked peaceful. I used to think memories were punishment reminders of what I've lost. But maybe they're gifts. Maybe they're how love visits us when we can't go home. Keanu let the words sink in, feeling their quiet truth. I think you're right, Walter. They sat together a moment longer, the cool night breeze rustling the rashed trees. A couple walking by recognized Keanu. But when they saw Walter leaning against him, they simply smiled and kept going. The world, for once, seemed to respect the silence. Walter straightened up slowly. You've been kind, son. Most folks would have called the police and driven away. Keanu shook his head. Most folks don't meet someone like you every day. Walter laughed softly. You talk like an old soul. Maybe that's why I didn't feel scared around you. Keanu stood and helped him to his feet. You hungry? There's a diner down the road still open. Walter looked at him with a hint of boyish mischief. Only if they've got more of that pie. Keanu smiled. I think we can make that happen. As they walked toward the car, the carousel music began again for one final round before closing. Walter turned back for a moment, the lights reflecting in his tired eyes. She's still waving, he whispered. Keanu looked too. Then let's make sure she sees you smiling. Walter nodded, his hand resting lightly on Keanu's arm. As they continued into the night, two travelers bound not by time, but by kindness. The drive back toward the main highway was quiet. The city lights faded behind them as Keanu guided the car toward a small rest stop by the edge of the road. Walter had fallen asleep, his head tilted slightly to one side, his hands resting over the crumpled map. The steady rhythm of his breathing filled the car, fragile but peaceful. Keanu parked beneath a flickering street lamp and took a deep breath. He looked at the old man beside him, tired, lost, but somehow content in his temporary peace. He didn't want to wake him, but he knew he needed to find someone who could help. Carefully, he reached into Walter's coat pocket for the wallet that had nearly slipped out earlier. Inside were a few dollar bills, an old photograph of a young woman with kind eyes, and a laminated card with faded ink. At the top, in shaky handwriting, it read, Emergency contact, James Pierce. Beneath it was a phone number, partially smudged but still legible. Keanu hesitated for a moment. He looked at Walter again, then at the name on the card. James, he murmured softly. You've been looking for him, haven't you? He stepped out of the car, pacing a few steps away into the cool night air. The phone felt heavy in his hand as he dialed the number. It rang 3 times before a cautious voice answered. Hello? Keanu spoke gently. Hi. I'm sorry to call you so late. Are you James Pierce? There was a short pause. Who is this? My name's Keanu Reeves, he said slowly. I think I'm with your father, Walter Pierce. For a few seconds, there was silence on the other end, then a sharp intake of breath. Wait, what did you just say? You're with my dad? Where is he? He's safe, Keanu replied quickly. He's with me right now. I found him on the highway earlier. Today. He seemed lost, trying to find his way home. Oh my God, James said, his voice cracking. We've been looking for him for 2 days. The care home called the police. They said he must have walked out sometime in the early morning. Keanu could hear the panic and exhaustion in the man's tone. He spoke softly, steady, and calm. He's okay. He's resting now. I didn't want to take him straight back until I knew more about where he belonged. He's been talking about his wife, Margaret, and about finding his house in Pasadena. James let out a shaky sigh. That's Mom. She passed a long time ago. He still thinks she's waiting for him. He talks about her every day. Keanu closed his eyes for a moment, hearing the ache behind those words. He misses her deeply, he said quietly. But He's been calm tonight. We visited a few places that helped him remember. I think it gave him some peace." On the other end, James didn't speak right away. Then, his voice softened. "You didn't have to do that. You could have just called the cops." Keanu leaned against the car, looking through the window at Walter's sleeping face. "Yeah, I know," he said. "But something told me he needed to finish this journey, not just be taken away from it." The line was quiet again. Then James said, "You don't even know him, but you sound like you understand him better than most people do." Keanu smiled faintly. "Maybe we've both been chasing things we lost." There was a long pause. Then James spoke, voice breaking. "Is he okay? Really okay?" "He's fine," Keanu said gently. "Tired, but safe. I'll bring him back to you. But if it's all right, I'd like to give him a little more time tonight. He's been trying so hard to find home. I don't want him to feel like he failed." James hesitated before answering, and when he did, his words came quietly, full of memory. "Dad used to be strong. He built everything with his hands. He's not the same anymore, but he always wanted to go home. Always." Keanu's voice softened even more. "Then let's help him feel like he did." James didn't speak for a few moments. When he finally did, his voice carried both gratitude and guilt. "You have no idea how much this means. He's been slipping away for years now. Some days he calls me by my brother's name. Other days, he doesn't remember I exist at all." Keanu listened quietly. The weight in James's tone reminded him of all the people who've loved and lost someone, slowly grieving a little more each day without ever saying goodbye. "He still remembers you," Keanu said softly. "He talks about his sons with pride. He mentioned you loved riding the lion on the carousel." James let out a breath that almost sounded like a laugh. "Yeah, that was me. I thought I was fearless back then. He'd always laugh when I fell off." Keanu smiled. He still laughs when he talks about it. There was a pause on the line. "You really spent the day with him?" "I did," Keanu said. "We went to the neighborhood where he used to live. We met a woman named Maria Delgado. She remembered him and your mom. Then we stopped at a park. He rode the carousel again, just like he used to with you and your brother." James's voice broke slightly. "I can't believe that. It's been years since I saw him truly happy. You did more for him in a few hours than we've been able to do in months." Keanu looked through the windshield again. Walter was still sleeping, his face relaxed, illuminated softly by the streetlight. "He just needed someone to listen," Keanu said quietly. "Someone to believe that he wasn't lost, just finding his way back in a world that changed too fast." On the phone, James cleared his throat. "He used to tell me that. He said the world moves quicker than the heart does. Guess I never understood what he meant until now." Keanu leaned against the car, his voice low. "He's still in there, James. The man who fixed clocks and taught kids. The one who danced with your mom in the kitchen. He's all still there. Just sometimes, you have to slow down to see him." There was a soft sniffle on the other end. "You talk like someone who's lost people too," James said. Keanu hesitated, then answered quietly, "I have. But I've also learned that the best way to honor them is to keep showing up for someone else." The line went quiet again, filled only with the faint sound of wind through the receiver. Then James said, "Can I talk to him? Just for a second?" Keanu opened the car door gently. "Sure, but he's asleep right now." "That's okay," James replied softly. "Just tell him we love him. Tell him he's not alone." Keanu nodded, though James couldn't see it. "I will." He ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket. For a long moment, he just stood there, the sound of distant cars humming through the empty rest stop. He looked up at the night sky, deep, endless, and silent, and then at Walter, who slept peacefully, his hands still clutching the folded map. Keanu whispered, "They're looking for you, Walter. You're almost home." He sat quietly in the car beside him, letting the silence stretch. There was something sacred in that stillness, the quiet understanding between two people connected by nothing more than kindness and timing. Keanu leaned back in his seat, watching as Walter stirred slightly, murmuring something under his breath. It sounded like a name. Maybe Margaret, maybe James, maybe both. And in that whisper, Keanu realized something simple yet profound, that home isn't just a place you find. It's the people who never stop looking for you. Walter stirred awake, blinking slowly as the streetlight flickered through the windshield. "Are we home?" he murmured. "Almost," Keanu said softly. "We found a clue. Your son James, he's been looking for you." Walter frowned, trying to piece the name together. "James? My boy?" His lips trembled, a faint smile forming. He used to call every Sunday. I didn't always remember, but I knew his voice. "He still remembers yours," Keanu said. "He asked me to tell you he loves you." Walter turned toward the window, his reflection faint in the glass. "I thought they gave up," he whispered. "Didn't think anyone would come." "They never stopped," Keanu replied gently. "They were just waiting for you to find your way." Walter closed his eyes, emotion softening his features. "You're a good man," he said. "You didn't have to stop for me." Keanu looked at him quietly. "Maybe I needed to." Walter smiled faintly, his voice barely a breath. "You remind me of my son." Keanu nodded. "And you remind me of the man who taught me what it means to go home." Calm, as if the world itself paused to listen. Morning sunlight poured gently through the clouds as Keanu steered the car back toward the heart of Pasadena. Walter was awake now, sitting upright, his eyes brighter than they had been the night before. The sleep had restored something fragile in him, an alertness, a spark of purpose. Keanu smiled as he caught the old man watching the passing scenery with a mixture of awe and confusion. "You recognize any of this?" he asked softly. Walter squinted at the rows of trees lining the boulevard. "I think so. Everything looks taller, or maybe I'm shorter." He laughed quietly at his own joke, then pointed suddenly toward a corner building. "That used to be the Rialto Theater. I saw my first movie there. Margaret and I went to see Singin' in the Rain." Keanu slowed the car, turning so Walter could get a better look. The old marquee was still there, though the theater had long been converted into an art gallery. Walter smiled wistfully. "They used to have a pianist play before the show. I remember Margaret whispering that it made her heart dance. I told her that was just the popcorn smell getting to her." Keanu chuckled softly. "You really loved her." Walter nodded. Every day, his gaze lingered on the building. Funny how the world keeps its bones, even after it changes its skin. Keanu pulled out his phone and began recording quietly. Walter's voice, soft but steady, carried the warmth of another time. "What are you doing?" Walter asked. "Just keeping these memories safe," Keanu said. "For your family, for James." Walter's eyes glistened. He liked that. He always said I talked too much about the past. Maybe now he'll see why. They drove a little farther, passing an old corner bakery. The smell of bread still wafted faintly from the open door. Walter perked up. That was it, Hastings Bakery. Margaret used to buy lemon tarts from there. She'd hum while waiting in line. Keanu smiled, slowing down. "Still there. Looks like it's doing well." Walter pressed his hand to the window, eyes wide with emotion. "I can almost taste them," he whispered. "She'd always give me the smaller half, said it was good for my health. I pretended to be mad, but I loved watching her laugh when she thought she'd gotten away with it." Keanu let the car idle for a moment, giving Walter time to savor the sight. He found himself wondering how many places in his own life held echoes he hadn't revisited. As they continued, Walter began naming more landmarks, The record shop that was now a bookstore. The old pharmacy turned into a coffee shop. The corner where he used to wait for Margaret's bus. Each name was like a candle being lit again after years of darkness. They passed a familiar white building with tall windows and a cross at the top. Walter's voice trembled as he pointed. "That church," he said softly. "That's where we got married." Keanu glanced at him. "Do you want to stop?" Walter nodded, his expression tender. "If you don't mind." Keanu pulled into the parking lot. The church looked worn by time, but still beautiful stained glass, glimmering in the sunlight. The doors open wide. He turned off the engine, and they sat in silence for a moment. Before stepping out, the air felt different here, calm, sacred. As they walked toward the entrance, Walter's steps were slow but sure. "We stood right there," he whispered, pointing to the worn stone steps. She wore a blue ribbon in her hair because she said white felt too ordinary. The priest laughed when I forgot my vows. I was too busy staring at her. Keanu followed him inside, the sound of their footsteps echoing softly through the empty space. Inside the church, the air was cool and still, carrying the faint scent of old wood and candle wax. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, scattering fragments of color across the pews. Walter stood motionless for a long time, his eyes fixed on the altar. "This place hasn't changed," he whispered. "Even the creak in the floor is the same." Keanu stayed a few steps behind him, allowing Walter space to remember. The old man walked slowly down the aisle, trailing his fingertips along the edge of the pews. His lips moved, as if counting steps. When he reached the front, he knelt with surprising steadiness, folding his trembling hands together. Keanu watched quietly. There was a sacred calm in the way Walter bowed his head, like a man reconnecting with a piece of himself he thought was gone forever. Walter began to speak softly, as though to someone only he could see. "Margaret, I made it home. Took a while, but I found it. Everything's different, but you'd still love it here. I hope you can hear me. I still wear my ring, you know. Never took it off." Keanu felt his throat tighten. He turned slightly to give Walter privacy, but couldn't help glancing toward the kine. Light falling across the floor. It illuminated the space around Walter like a quiet blessing. After a few minutes, Walter lifted his head. His eyes were wet, but there was peace there too. "You ever feel like someone you love never really left?" he asked softly. Keanu nodded. "All the time." Walter gave a small, knowing smile. "Then you understand. She's still here somewhere, just not the way I remember." Keanu helped him stand, steadying him as they turned back toward the exit. As they walked down the aisle, Walter stopped beside one of the pews and touched the wood gently. "That's where my son James sat. He kept fidgeting through the ceremony. He was 5, too young to sit still. I remember telling him, 'One day, you'll sit still for love.'" Keanu smiled, faintly. "And did he?" Walter chuckled softly. "He married a nurse. Guess he did better than I did at listening." They reached the doors, and Keanu pushed one open. Outside, the sunlight was bright. Again, the warmth a welcome contrast to the cool air inside. Walter paused on the steps, breathing deeply, as though taking in both the present and the past at once. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for letting me stop here. I didn't know how much I needed this." Keanu nodded. "You don't owe me thanks. I'm just glad you remembered." Walter smiled gently. "Funny thing, remembering. You don't realize how precious it is until it starts slipping away." Keanu helped him back to the car, and as they drove away, he glanced at Walter, who sat with his hands folded in his lap. There was a softness to his face now, an ease that hadn't been there before. "Do you think she heard me?" Walter asked quietly. Keanu looked at the road ahead. "I think she's been listening this whole time." Walter nodded slowly, turning toward the window. Then maybe she's smiling again. That's enough for me. The car moved slowly through Pasadena's winding streets, bathed in the soft gold of late afternoon. Walter's head rested lightly against the window, watching trees blur into streaks of light and shadow. His voice was calm now, the frantic edge of confusion replaced by the gentleness of remembrance. "That used to be the high school," he said, pointing toward a red brick building on the corner. "I taught there for 30 years. Fifth period was history my favorite. I used to tell the kids that history isn't just about kings and wars. It's about people remembering each other." Keanu smiled, glancing at him. "Sounds like you were the kind of teacher people don't forget." Walter's eyes softened. "I hope so. Some of those kids still send Christmas cards, though lately I forget to open them. My son reads them to me." He laughed, quietly. He says one day, "I'll start believing I was somebody." "You are somebody," Keanu said. "You still are." Walter nodded faintly, falling into silence again as they passed the old record shop. It had become a bookstore, just like he'd said earlier. Through the window, a young couple stood flipping through a shelf of poetry books, laughing softly. Walter smiled at the sight. "We used to dance to the radio, Margaret and I. That same building, different song." The words hung between them like a memory caught in sunlight. A few blocks later, Keanu parked the car at a small overlook where the San Gabriel Mountains glowed pink in the distance. They sat for a while, saying nothing. Walter finally spoke, his tone quiet but certain. "You've given me a good day, son. I can't remember many lately, but this one I'll try to keep." Keanu looked at him and nodded. "You found pieces of yourself today, Walter. That's more than most of us manage." Walter smiled, his eyes reflecting the fading light. Maybe remembering isn't about keeping everything. Maybe it's just about holding on to the right things. Keanu reached for his phone again and recorded the moment, not for fame or record, but as proof of what kindness can preserve. In the stillness, two lives touched quietly, and both, in their own way, remembered. By the time the sun began to sink behind the hills, Pasadena was bathed in the fading glow of twilight. The streets that had seemed warm and alive a few hours earlier now looked quiet, painted in shades of amber and gray. Keanu glanced at Walter, who had grown silent in the passenger seat. The old man's eyes wandered from one darkened storefront to another, confusion slowly creeping back into his face. "Walter," Keanu said gently, "you okay?" Walter blinked, as if waking from a dream. "Where are we?" "We're still in Pasadena," Keanu replied. "We've been driving around a bit. Thought I'd get us a place to rest for the night." Walter frowned, staring out the window. "Pasadena? No. This doesn't look like home. The streets are wrong. The lights are too bright." His breathing quickened. "Where's Margaret? She was supposed to meet us after church." Keanu pulled the car over to the side of the road, cutting the engine. "It's all right. You've had a long day. We'll rest soon." Walter turned toward him suddenly, his voice trembling. "James?" Keanu hesitated, realizing the old man wasn't seeing him anymore. He was looking through him, past him, to someone else. "James," Walter said again, softer this time. "I thought you were gone. You shouldn't be driving. You never liked driving at night." Keanu's first instinct was to correct him, to remind him of who he was. But something in Walter's tone stopped him. The confusion in his eyes wasn't fear anymore. It was love, trying to find a familiar face in the dark. Keanu leaned slightly closer. "I'm here, Dad," he said quietly. "It's all right." Walter smiled faintly, relief flooding his features. "You always were a good boy," he whispered, "even when you didn't." "Think so?" Keanu swallowed hard, his throat tightening. He could hear the raw sincerity in Walter's voice, words that clearly had been waiting years to be said. Walter continued, his voice trembling. "I wasn't a good father. I tried, but after your mother passed, I I didn't know how to hold everything together. I thought if I stayed strong, it'd make you stronger too. But maybe I just pushed you away." Keanu looked down, his hand gripping the steering wheel. The confession hit him deeply. For a moment, he wasn't Keanu Reeves, the actor or the rescuer. He was just a son again, remembering his own father's absence, the silence that had stretched between them for years. Walter's voice wavered. "I should have said I was proud of you more. I should have told you that I loved you every time you left the house. I thought you already knew." Keanu blinked back emotion. "You did your best," he said softly, "and you loved us in your way. That's what mattered." Walter exhaled shakily, his eyes closing. "You always say the right things, James. Your mother used to say you had her heart." Keanu's lips curved into a quiet smile. "Maybe I got lucky." The moment stretched in silence, tender and heavy. Outside, the first stars began to appear, faint against the deepening sky. Keanu started the car again and drove until he found a small roadside motel tucked behind a row of eucalyptus trees. The neon sign buzzed faintly in the dark. He parked the car and turned to Walter, who was staring out the window with childlike curiosity. "Let's get you some rest," Keanu said gently. Walter nodded, murmuring something under his breath, something that sounded like a name. Keanu helped Walter out of the car, steadying him as they walked toward the small office, lit by a single yellow bulb. The air smelled faintly of rain and eucalyptus, and the hum of the freeway in the distance was the only sound. The clerk behind the counter looked up in surprise when Keanu entered, but before he could say anything, Keanu gave him a small, polite smile. "2 rooms, please. Ground floor," he said. The clerk nodded, sliding 2 keys across the counter. "Long drive?" Keanu glanced back at Walter, who was looking around the lobby as if it were a museum from another world. "Yeah," he said softly. "You could say that." They made their way down the narrow hall. Walter's steps were slow, careful, his eyes flicking from door to door like he was trying to memorize the numbers. When they reached the room, Keanu unlocked the door and guided him inside. The room was simple. 2 beds, a small television, the faint scent of detergent and dust. Walter sank onto the bed with a sigh. "Feels like I've been walking for years," he murmured. "You have," Keanu said quietly, pulling a blanket over his lap. "But you're here now." Walter nodded absently, his gaze drifting to the small TV in the corner. "Can we watch something?" "I always liked the black and white ones. The world made more sense in black and white." Keanu found the remote, turning the TV on until an old movie flickered onto the screen. The faint music filled the room, a 1,940 seconds love story, soft and nostalgic. Walter's eyes brightened for a moment, as if the sound alone pulled him back in time. Keanu sat in the chair by the window, watching him. The old man laughed once at something on the screen, then fell silent again, the rhythm of his breathing slowing as fatigue settled in. After a while, Walter spoke again, voice barely above a whisper. "You know, James, I kept that broken watch you gave me. You said you'd fix it when you got older." Keanu's throat tightened. "Maybe I still will." Walter smiled faintly. "You were always good with your hands. You just didn't know how much." His words trailed off as sleep crept in. The room grew quieter. The TV's glow flickered across Walter's peaceful face. Keanu stayed there, unmoving, his thoughts tangled between memory and meaning. Walter stirred one last time, murmuring a single word, "Margaret," before his breathing settled again. Keanu whispered softly, "She's right here, Walter." Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it a hush that felt like a benediction. Inside that dim motel room, under the pale light of an old television, 2 generations found rest not as strangers, but as a father and son reunited by grace and time. Soft sunlight filtered through the thin motel curtains, cutting pale streaks across the faded carpet. Keanu stirred awake in the chair by the window, his neck stiff from the night. The television was still humming quietly, showing the end credits of some forgotten film. Walter was still asleep, breathing evenly, the blanket pulled up to his chin. For a long moment, Keanu simply watched him, remembering how restless the old man had been the night before, lost in memories, calling out for faces long gone. But now, there was peace. His expression was calm, almost content. A few minutes later, Walter began to move, stretching his arms slowly. His eyes fluttered open, clear and alert. "Morning already?" he asked, his voice softer but steady. "Yeah," Keanu said with a gentle smile. "You slept through the night." Walter rubbed his eyes and sat up, blinking toward the light. "I haven't done that in years," he said. Then, as if remembering something, he looked around the room. "Where are we?" "Just a motel off the highway," Keanu said. "We stopped here after a long day." Walter nodded slowly. "Right. The drive, the church, the roses." He smiled faintly. "It's all coming back." Keanu felt relief wash over him. For the first time, Walter's mind seemed clear, like a curtain had lifted. "I wanted to thank you," Walter said quietly, "for bringing me home, even if it's not the same house." Keanu looked at him thoughtfully. "You're welcome, Walter. You've done a lot of the work yourself." Walter chuckled softly. "I had a good driver." The light through the curtains brightened. Walter swung his legs over the side of the bed, reaching for his coat hanging on the chair. He fumbled through the pockets until he found a folded piece of stationery and a pen. His hands trembled as he smoothed the paper across the table. "What are you doing?" Keanu asked gently. Walter looked up with a tender smile. "Writing to Margaret. I promised her I'd come home. Guess this is as close as I'll get." Keanu watched in silence as Walter began to write. The pen scratched slowly, hesitantly, across the page. His handwriting shook, but each letter carried care and emotion. He paused often, staring at the words as if seeing her face in them. Keanu turned away to give him privacy, looking out the window at the quiet parking lot beyond. The world outside went about its morning, business cars pulling out, birds calling, the day moving forward. But inside the small room, time stood still. After several minutes, Walter folded the paper neatly and slid it into an old envelope. He sealed it with trembling fingers and set it gently on the table. "There," he said softly. "One last letter." Keanu approached. "Do you want me to mail it?" Walter shook his head. "No. I want you to take it somewhere she'd see it. Somewhere peaceful." He smiled faintly. "You'll know the right place." Keanu nodded, the weight of the promise settling in his chest. "I will." Walter leaned back, a look of quiet satisfaction on his face. "You know, I thought I'd forget everything before I got the chance to say goodbye. But maybe remembering isn't about holding on to everything. Maybe it's just about letting go the right way." Keanu didn't reply. He didn't need to. The truth in Walter's words filled the room like light. Keanu helped Walter dress slowly, buttoning his shirt with patient hands. The old man's movements were careful but steady, his eyes clear and focused. There was a quiet dignity about him that morning, as though he understood that something important had been completed. Once they stepped outside, the fresh air greeted them. The highway hummed softly in the distance, and the smell of morning coffee drifted from a nearby diner. Walter squinted toward the sky. "Feels like a good day to say goodbye," he murmured. Keanu smiled. "Let's make it a gentle one." They drove toward the edge of town, the sun climbing higher as they passed through the familiar streets. Walter sat silently, holding the envelope close to his chest. When they stopped at a small flower shop on the corner of Colorado Boulevard, he turned to Keanu. "She loved white roses," he said. "Said they reminded her of beginnings. Every time I brought her one, she'd put it in a glass by the window." Keanu nodded and got out of the car. The tiny shop smelled of rain and fresh petals. He returned moments later with a dozen white roses wrapped in paper, placing them gently on Walter's lap. Walter's fingers brushed against the petals, his smile faint but genuine. "Still soft," he whispered, "just like her hands." They drove on until they reached a quiet park surrounded by trees. A pond glimmered at its center, reflecting the sky in broken light. Keanu parked under a tall oak tree. "Here," he said softly. "This feels right." Walter nodded. "Yes," he said, almost to himself. She would have liked it here. He opened the envelope carefully, running his fingers across the creased paper before looking up at Keanu. "You'll leave this for her, won't you?" "I will," Keanu said. "Right by the roses." Walter smiled faintly. "Then I can rest." He closed his eyes for a moment, breathing deeply. The sound of the pond and the soft whisper of wind filled the silence. For the first time since they'd met, Walter looked completely at peace. As they sat together, Keanu found himself thinking not about endings, but about all the unseen threads that connected lives, how one man's kindness could carry another home. Walter turned his head slightly. "You know, son," he said quietly, "if you ever forget where you're going, just follow the sound of love. It always knows the way back." Keanu nodded, his voice steady but low. "I will, Walter." The old man smiled again, eyes drifting toward the bright horizon. "Good. Then you'll never be lost." The drive toward the care home was quiet. The morning sun hung low in the sky, painting the streets in soft amber light. Walter sat in the passenger seat, his letter gone from his hands but not from his heart. The envelope now rested safely in Keanu's jacket pocket beside the scent of the white roses. They drove through the outskirts of Pasadena until the city gave way to open roads lined with oak trees. The sign for Golden Haven Assisted Living appeared on the right, a peaceful building surrounded by green lawns and walking paths. Keanu slowed the car, glancing at Walter, who stared out the window with a calm, distant expression. "This looks familiar," Walter said quietly. "Have we been here before?" Keanu nodded gently. "A few people are waiting to see you, Walter." The old man smiled faintly. "Then let's not keep them waiting." As they pulled into the driveway, two men stood near the entrance, their faces tense with anticipation. One was in his 50s, his hair graying at the temples. The other, a few years younger, with a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. Keanu recognized them immediately from the photos he'd seen online the night before. James and Michael Pierce. Keanu parked the car and turned to Walter. "They're here," he said softly. "Your boys." Walter blinked, his hands trembling as he reached for the door handle. "My boys?" he whispered, as though the words themselves were too heavy to believe. Keanu stepped out first and came around to open the passenger side. The moment Walter's shoes touched the ground, the two men hurried forward. James reached him first, his voice breaking. "Dad! Oh my God, Dad!" Walter looked at him blankly for a second, confusion clouding his face. Then, like the sun breaking through clouds, recognition flickered in his eyes. "You boys came back," he said softly. "I knew you would." James wrapped his arms around him, his body shaking. "We never stopped looking for you," he whispered. "You scared us to death." Walter's hands gripped his son's shoulders tightly, the strength in them surprising for his age. "I just wanted to find home," he murmured. "I didn't mean to get lost." Behind them, Michael wiped his eyes, laughing through tears. "You always did have a terrible sense of direction." Walter chuckled weakly. "Still do, apparently." Keanu stood a few steps away, watching the scene unfold with quiet reverence. The reunion felt sacred, like a circle closing after years of wandering. For a moment, time itself seemed to stand still. James turned toward him then, his eyes red, but filled with gratitude. "You're the one who found him, aren't you?" Keanu nodded once. "Just happened to be passing by." James shook his head, tears still streaming down his face. No, you didn't just pass by. You stopped. Nobody else did. Keanu offered a small smile. Maybe that's all any of us need sometimes. Someone who'll stop. The care home staff appeared at the entrance, their faces lighting up as they saw Walter. A nurse rushed forward, relief flooding her voice. Mr. Pierce, we've been so worried about you. Walter smiled faintly at her. I was only out for a walk. Everyone laughed softly through their tears, the tension breaking into gentle warmth. The nurse guided Walter gently toward the entrance, but he stopped midway and turned back toward Keanu. His voice was calm, but his eyes glistened with emotion. You'll keep your promise, won't you? About the letter? Keanu nodded. I will. I know exactly where to leave it. Walter smiled, his hand trembling slightly as he reached out. Keanu took it, their handshake steady, silent, and full of understanding. Thank you, son, Walter said. You gave me more than a ride. You gave me a road back to myself. Keanu squeezed his hand gently. It was an honor, Walter. The old man smiled once more before James placed a supportive arm around him, guiding him inside. Keanu stayed near the doorway, watching as Walter greeted the nurses like old friends. The staff were emotional, several wiping their eyes as they watched the man they'd feared lost return home safe. Then someone whispered near the lobby, "That's Keanu Reeves." Within minutes, a few staff members had pulled out their phones, discreetly capturing the scene. Outside, a small crowd began to form near the parking lot. Neighbors, locals, and even a few reporters who'd seen the viral photos circulating online of Keanu helping an elderly man off the highway. One reporter, holding a microphone, approached cautiously. "Mr. Reeves, could we ask you a few questions? The photo from the freeway is everywhere. People are calling you a hero." Keanu shook his head softly, his voice calm and measured. "I'm not a hero. I was just in the right place at the right time. But what made you stop? When everyone else didn't?" the reporter asked. Keanu looked toward the glass doors where Walter stood between his two sons, laughing faintly as they spoke to the nurses. His answer came without hesitation. Because sometimes, slowing down is the only way to remember what matters. We're all just passing through, and once in a while, someone needs help finding home. The reporter lowered his microphone, visibly moved. Keanu gave a small nod of courtesy and stepped away. He didn't wait for more questions, didn't seek recognition. He just turned toward his car, slipping his hands into his jacket pockets. Inside was Walter's letter, still sealed and safe beside the faint scent of white roses. As he opened the door, James came rushing after him. "Mr. Reeves," he called, breathless. "Before you go, thank you. I mean it. For everything. You gave my dad something I thought was gone, hope." Keanu smiled gently. He already had it. He just needed someone to remind. James blinked back tears. "If you ever need anything, anything at all, our family owes you." Keanu shook his head, his expression soft. "Just take care of him. That's all the thanks I need." James nodded, unable to speak. Keanu started the car and glanced in the rearview mirror. One last time. Walter stood in the doorway with his sons, waving weakly. Keanu waved back, the morning light glinting through the windshield as he pulled away, leaving behind not fame or noise, but a simple act of kindness that had changed 3 lives forever. By dawn, the world had already caught wind of what happened. The photograph of Keanu guiding an elderly man through highway traffic, Walter's hand gripping the map, Keanu's arms steady around him, had swept across every corner of the internet. It wasn't just a picture anymore. It was a story, a symbol of humanity in a world too busy to stop. Headlines appeared on every major platform before breakfast. Keanu Reeves saves lost Alzheimer's patient on California highway. Actor turns Good Samaritan after rescuing elderly man. Others were more poetic. He didn't just stop traffic, he stopped time for that man. The comments came in waves. People shared their own memories, their own heartbreak. One woman wrote, "My father wandered off once. No one stopped. Seeing this gave me hope again." Another posted, "He reminded us that compassion is louder than fame." Television anchors repeated the story throughout the day. A clip from the diner's security camera had surfaced Keanu walking beside Walter, gently holding his arm, guiding him out of harm's way. The footage lasted less than 30 seconds, but it was enough to move millions. At the care home, James and Michael were overwhelmed by calls from reporters. They tried to shield their father from the attention, knowing he wouldn't understand what viral meant. Walter only knew that his boys were visiting more often now, and that the world suddenly seemed a little kinder. Meanwhile, Keanu kept his distance from the chaos. He didn't give interviews or respond to requests for comment. His assistant forwarded him a dozen invitations to appear on talk shows, all of which he quietly declined. He didn't need to talk about what happened. The moment itself had spoken loud enough. That morning, he sat alone in his kitchen, coffee steaming beside his laptop. The letter Walter had written to Margaret lay unfolded on the table. Keanu read it again slowly, each line a whisper of devotion. It wasn't long, but every word carried the tenderness of a man who'd lived for love. "My dearest Margaret, I found our street again, though the house is gone. But I felt you there, just the same. Maybe home isn't a place. Maybe it's what we leave in people's hearts. If so, I've been home all along." Keanu folded the letter carefully and slipped it into an envelope. Then he typed a quiet message on his computer, a donation form for the Alzheimer's Foundation. Under the line for "in honor of," he wrote, "Walter and Margaret Pierce." He clicked submit, closed his laptop, and sat for a moment in stillness. The coffee had gone cold, but he didn't mind. Outside, the morning light filtered through the window, warm and calm. Somewhere, he imagined, Walter was smiling beside the roses he'd once planted. Keanu didn't share any posts or issue a statement. Instead, he sent a brief text to James. He found his way home. "Take care of him." James replied minutes later, with a photo of Walter sitting by the window of the care home, holding one of the white roses Keanu had left behind. The caption read simply, "He remembers the smell." Keanu smiled softly, setting the phone down. For the first time in days, he felt something deep and unshakable. A peace that had nothing to do with recognition, and everything to do with doing the right thing when no one's watching. By midday, the story had reached every corner of the country. Talk shows replayed the video clip on loop, dissecting every gesture, every quiet word. But what captured people most wasn't the fame, it was the humility. Viewers saw not an actor, but a man who stopped in a sea of speeding cars to help someone invisible to the world. Across the internet, hashtags flooded social media. Number be like Keanu. Number kindness is contagious. Number Walter and Keanu. Families posted photos of their own loved ones who struggled with memory loss. Strangers shared stories of the moments they wished they had stopped. Under a viral thread, one user wrote, "He didn't just help an old man. He reminded us what slowing down looks like." Major networks tried for interviews, but Keanu remained unreachable. When a journalist from the Los Angeles Times finally caught his publicist, the only response she received was a single line, "He just did what anyone should." That evening, a new post began to circulate, a letter from James Pierce. It was short, written from the heart. "To everyone who shared our father's story, thank you. Mr. Reeves didn't save a celebrity's parent. He helped a man who forgot where home was and helped him remember who he loved. We'll never forget his kindness." The post gathered over 1 million likes within hours. Comments poured in, calling it the most beautiful story of the year. At the care home, Walter didn't fully understand the attention. But each morning, James would bring him printouts of the articles and photos. Walter would smile at them, confused but happy. "That man looks familiar," he'd say softly. "He's a good driver, isn't he?" And every time, James would nod through tears. "Yeah, Dad. The best." Meanwhile, far from cameras and headlines, Keanu kept his life quiet. That night, he drove to Griffith Park, a small envelope in his jacket pocket, the one with Walter's letter to Margaret. He walked until he reached a hill overlooking the city lights. The wind carried the scent of eucalyptus, the same as the highway that day. He placed the envelope beside the bouquet of white roses he had brought and whispered, "He found you again." Then he stood for a long time, watching the city below flicker and hum, unaware of the small act of grace that had rippled through it. When he returned to his car, he noticed a new article. Headline glowing on his phone: Keanu Reeves declines interviews, sends anonymous donation to Alzheimer's Foundation. The article didn't have his, quote, "didn't need it." Instead, it featured a single message from an online tribute wall. He didn't just stop traffic, he stopped time for that man. Keanu set the phone face down, started the engine, and drove off quietly into the night. Somewhere, behind him, a letter rested among the roses, carrying a love that had survived even memory itself. And though the world was still talking, Keanu knew the story's real ending wasn't online. It was in the heart of one family that, for the first time in years, felt whole again. 2 months later, the world had long since moved on to other headlines. But one quiet morning, Keanu found a small handwritten envelope waiting in his mail. The return address was from Golden Haven Assisted Living. The handwriting was careful, almost formal. James Pierce. Keanu took a deep breath before opening it. Inside, there was a short letter and a folded newspaper clipping. The paper was soft from handling, creased along the edges. At the top, in bold black print, were the words, "In loving memory of Walter Pierce." Keanu sat at his kitchen table, unfolding the letter. James's handwriting was shaky but heartfelt. "Mr. Reeves, Dad passed away peacefully last week." He was holding the letter he wrote to Mom, the one you kept safe for him. "We found it beside him when he went to sleep. The nurses said he smiled that night more than he had in years. You gave him something no medicine could piece. For that, our family will forever be grateful. P.S. He talked about you often, said you reminded him of the kind of man he always hoped to be." Keanu sat for a long time without moving. Outside, the morning sun broke through thin clouds, washing the kitchen in soft light. He ran his fingers over the letter, feeling the weight of those words settle into his chest. He turned to the small bouquet of white roses he had bought the night before, not knowing why. Now, he did. Later that afternoon, he drove toward Pasadena again, taking the same route he'd driven with Walter 2 months earlier. The city looked the same. Busy streets, coffee shops, the familiar theater, the bakery that still smelled of lemon tarts. But the drive felt different now. Every landmark carried Walter's presence. When he reached the old neighborhood, he slowed down, turning onto the street where Walter's house once stood. The same modern home stood there, polished windows, trimmed lawn, children's toys scattered on the porch. But the soul of the place felt unchanged. Keanu parked nearby and stepped out. The air was warm, touched by the faint scent of roses from a nearby garden. He walked slowly toward the sidewalk where Walter had once stood, staring at the house that no longer belonged to him. The memory of that moment came rushing back, the look on Walter's face, the ache in his voice when he whispered, "It's gone." Keanu reached into his jacket and took out one of the white roses. Its petals were pure, soft and glowing in the sunlight. He crouched down and laid it gently on the curb in front of the house. For a moment, he didn't move. The world seemed to hold its breath. "You made it home, Walter," he whispered. The wind stirred lightly, carrying the scent of the rose through the still air. A small child's laughter echoed from inside the new house, blending with the sound of birds in the distance. Keanu smiled faintly. Somehow, it felt right that life had continued here, that joy still lived where sorrow once lingered. The sky over Pasadena was pale gray. When Keanu parked near the corner where the old Pierce house once stood, the morning air carried a quiet chill, and the street was nearly empty, just a mailman in the distance and the faint rustle of wind through jacaranda trees. He stepped out of the car, holding a single white rose wrapped in paper and the small envelope James had sent him 2 days earlier. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment, looking at the modern home that now occupied the space where Walter and Margaret had built their life. Its fresh paint, glass windows, and trimmed hedges looked nothing like the photo Walter once described. Yet beneath the pavement, Keanu imagined the echoes of laughter, Sunday mornings, and the gentle rhythm of a family long gone. He opened the envelope again and took out the obituary. It was simple. No grand statements, just truth written with care. Walter Henry Pierce, devoted husband, father, and teacher, passed peacefully on a Tuesday morning. He was holding a letter addressed to his late wife, whom he loved until his final breath. Beneath it was a short note from James and Michael. He remembered you until the end. He told everyone that a kind man brought him home. You gave him peace, Mr. Reeves, and we'll never forget that. Keanu folded the papers carefully, placing them back inside. He knelt by the edge of the curb, setting the white rose gently on the ground. Its petals brushed against the cold concrete as a gust of wind swept past, scattering a few small leaves across the pavement. He whispered quietly, "You made it home, Walter." The words felt simple, but they carried everything that needed saying. He stayed there for a while, just listening to the faint buzz of the city waking up, to the whisper of wind through trees, and to something softer beneath it all, like the memory of a voice still lingering in the air. A young woman walked her dog nearby and paused, recognizing him. She didn't say anything, just gave a small nod, sensing the stillness of the moment. Keanu nodded back politely, his gaze never leaving the rose. As he stood, he felt a quiet peace settle over him. There was no sadness now, only gratitude. Gratitude that he'd been there that day, that he had listened, that he had seen the man beneath the confusion. Before leaving, he looked once more at the rose lying on the sidewalk, its white petals glowing faintly in the morning light. It wasn't a monument or a headline. It was a promise kept. Keanu turned back toward his car, the wind tugging lightly at his jacket as he walked. Behind him, the rose stayed in place, perfectly still, marking not an ending, but a gentle return. Walter had finally gone home, and somehow Keanu felt that he had too. A few weeks after visiting Walter's old neighborhood, Keanu found himself sitting at a quiet beach cafe overlooking the Pacific. The morning mist was lifting, and the water shimmered under the rising sun. The clinking of cups, the low murmur of conversation, and the rhythm of the waves created a stillness he hadn't felt in a long time. He sat near the railing, a notebook open beside his coffee. For a while, he just watched the sea. The horizon seemed endless. Much like the mind, he thought beautiful, vast, and sometimes unreachable. He took a slow breath and closed his eyes. Walter's voice came back to him, faint but distinct. "If you ever forget where you're going, just follow the sound of love." The words lingered in the salt air. Keanu thought about how easily the world moved past people like Walter, people who once built lives, taught children, loved deeply, and then slowly faded from view. It wasn't just memory that disappeared. It was visibility. Society often forgot those who had shaped it. He stirred his coffee absently, watching the tiny ripples form on the surface. The act of helping Walter had changed something in him, quietly but permanently. It had reminded him how fragile memory could be, and how easily dignity could erode when the world stopped looking. As he looked out across the water, he remembered his own mother's face, the gentle lines that deepened each year, the way she would sometimes pause mid-sentence, searching for a word. He remembered brushing her hair one afternoon and realizing how time itself was both kind and cruel. He took his pen and began to write. Each word came slow but certain, flowing straight from what he felt rather than what he thought. "Fame is a map that fades," he wrote. "Kindness is the road that remains." He paused, letting the lines sink in. It wasn't meant for an audience, not for press or publicity. A breeze came from the ocean. Flipping a few pages of the notebook, Keanu smiled faintly, securing them under his hand. He thought of all the Walters out there, men and women lost not just to illness, but to neglect, to indifference. People who once mattered to someone, now walking through life unseen. He took another sip of coffee, staring at the horizon that had begun to glow with gold. Somewhere beyond that endless blue, he imagined the people he'd lost: his father, his friends, and maybe now Walter watching over him with the quiet wisdom of those who finally understand what really matters. He leaned back in his chair, feeling the warmth of the sun touch his face, and whispered to himself, "Kindness is the only thing time can't erase." The waves rolled steadily against the shore, their rhythm slow and deliberate, like a heartbeat echoing through the morning air. Keanu watched a group of children building sandcastles nearby, their laughter cutting through the hush of the sea breeze. One of them, no older than 6, held up a seashell and shouted, "Look, Grandpa!" The words struck him softly, pulling a faint smile to his face. He thought again of Walter, of the fragile bridge between age and youth. The world moved so fast now, always forward, never pausing. And yet there were still quiet moments, where time seemed to stand still, where kindness stitched 2 strangers together across generations. That was the part people often forgot. Every act of compassion became part of someone's memory, even when names were lost. He turned a page in his notebook and began to write again. Memory is not about holding on. It's about passing something forward. The words felt simple, but true. A waiter approached, setting down a refill of coffee. "You're Keanu Reeves, right?" he asked hesitantly. Keanu looked up with a small nod. "Yeah." The young man smiled shyly. "I saw that story about you and the old man. My grandmother has Alzheimer's. That story meant a lot to my mom. She cried when she saw it." Keanu returned the smile, his tone quiet. "How's your grandmother doing?" "She has good days and bad ones," the waiter said softly. "But we still take her for walks every evening. She loves the sound of the ocean." "That's good," Keanu said. "Keep walking with her. Even if she forgets where she's going, she'll remember how it felt to be with you." The waiter nodded, eyes glistening. "Thank you, sir." After he left, Keanu sat for a long time, staring at the sea again. The conversation stayed with him. Maybe that was what Walter had been trying to teach him all along, that love wasn't measured by how much we remember, but by how deeply we stay present for each other. He looked down at his notebook once more and added another line beneath what he'd written earlier. "We live on, in the hearts that choose to stop for us." The simplicity of it calmed him. He thought of all the people who had stopped for him in small, quiet ways. Friends who had believed in him when he doubted himself. Strangers who had shown him grace when he least expected it. A seagull landed nearby, pecking at a crumb on the floor, and for a fleeting moment, everything felt connected. The ocean, the sky, the boy with the seashell, the memory of Walter smiling beside the roses. Keanu closed his notebook, slipping it into his jacket pocket. The breeze lifted again, carrying with it the faint smell of salt and driftwood. He took one last look at the horizon and whispered, "Thank you, Walter, for reminding me how to stop." Then he stood, placed a few bills under his cup, and walked down to the sand. Each step sank softly into the shore, leaving brief imprints that the tide would soon erase. But somewhere, in a care home photo album, an old picture remained: 2 men standing on a highway, one guiding the other toward safety. And though the world would move on, that single moment of humanity would continue to ripple outward, unseen but unforgotten, like footprints beneath the sea. Months later, the echo of Walter's story still lingered quietly in Keanu's mind. Life had returned to its usual rhythm: film sets, interviews, long rides on his motorcycle, but something in him had shifted. The experience with Walter wasn't just a memory, it was a mission waiting for form. One afternoon, while riding along the Pacific Coast Highway, he pulled over at a scenic overlook. The sea stretched endlessly before him, its horizon fading into gold. The wind tugged at his jacket, carrying the faint roar of waves below. That's when the thought came simple, steady, undeniable. There were more Walters out there, more sons waiting for a call, more families searching for those who had slipped through the cracks. He couldn't find them all, but maybe he could help others too. That night, he sat at his desk with his journal open and wrote the words that would become the seed of something much larger: the Memory Ride Project. The concept was straightforward. Motorcyclists, men and women who loved the open road, would volunteer their time to help locate missing elderly individuals with Alzheimer's and dementia. They would partner with local communities, police, and care centers, using their mobility and network to cover wide areas quickly. Each rider would carry a symbol on their jacket, a small white rose embroidered over a compass. Keanu reached out quietly to a few trusted friends, people who understood compassion over recognition. Within weeks, word spread through biker communities across California. Riders from San Diego, San Francisco, and even Nevada reached out, eager to join. They didn't ask for publicity. They just wanted to ride for something that mattered. Funding the initiative was easy enough for him, but he did it quietly through a small foundation, using no name, no logo. He didn't want the project to be about him. He wanted it to belong to everyone who had ever stopped to help someone lost on life's highway. The first memory ride took place 6 months after Walter's passing. A group of 20 bikers gathered at sunrise in Los Angeles, their engines low and respectful, the white roses pinned proudly to their jackets. They rode together through small towns, stopping at care centers and hospitals to deliver comfort packages and flyers of missing elderly individuals. Each ride ended the same way, with a moment of silence and a vow to keep searching, no matter how long it took. News began to spread again, but this time, Keanu's name was nowhere in the headlines. The stories focused on the riders, ordinary people doing extraordinary acts of care. A headline read, "Motorcyclists unite to help find missing seniors. The Memory Ride movement grows." Families across the country began writing in, asking how to volunteer or share information about their loved ones. The project had become something far beyond its creator's intention. It had become a movement powered by empathy and shared humanity. Within a year, the Memory Ride Project spread far beyond California. What began as a handful of riders became a network of hundreds across the country, ordinary people with extraordinary purpose. Retired veterans, nurses, teachers, and young bikers alike joined the cause. They carried small GPS trackers, maps of missing persons, and most importantly, compassion. In Texas, a group called the Lone Star Guardians helped locate a 78-year-old woman who had wandered from her memory care unit. In Ohio, 2 riders found an elderly man sitting on a park bench, disoriented but safe. When they called his daughter, she cried over the phone and said, "You found my dad because you cared enough to look." Every month, new stories surfaced. Volunteers weren't chasing headlines, they were finding people. Local newspapers called it the movement that moves. At the project's quiet headquarters in Pasadena, a small team coordinated routes and maintained contact with care homes across several states. The office had no grand signage, only a small emblem painted on the door, a white rose over a compass. Inside, a wall displayed photos of reunions, families hugging loved ones, nurses smiling through tears, riders standing beside people they'd helped bring home. Beneath each photo was a short inscription with the same 5 words: "No one should be forgotten." Keanu sometimes visited the office late at night when the place was empty. He'd walk along the photo wall slowly, tracing his fingers over the captions. He never told anyone he was the project's founder. To the volunteers, It was simply a cause that appeared out of compassion and grew through kindness. That was how he wanted it. One evening, he received an email from James Pierce. It contained a single photo, Walter's sons holding a memory ride jacket with the white rose emblem sewn over the heart. James wrote, "We wanted you to know we ride with them now. Every mile feels like we're keeping Dad's promise alive." Keanu smiled quietly, closing the email without replying. Some messages didn't need answers, they just needed to be felt. Months later, a small documentary surfaced online. It featured the Memory Ride volunteers and their impact across the nation. Families spoke about being reunited, writers talked about what the road taught them, and at the end, a nurse read aloud one of the quotes that had inspired them all. "Fame is a map that fades. Kindness is the road that remains." The video ended with a montage, bikers rolling through desert highways at sunset, engines rumbling softly as the camera panned over, faces smiling, crying, embracing. A voiceover from one of the volunteers said, "We don't ride for glory. We ride because someone has to stop when everyone else keeps driving." The clip went viral in hours, reaching millions. No one knew who had started the movement, and no one asked. The anonymity made it even more powerful. Late that night, Keanu watched the video alone in his living room. As the credits rolled, he leaned back in his chair, eyes glistening in the flicker of the screen. He whispered softly, "You're still changing the world, Walter." Outside, the city lights stretched endlessly, like a map that never ended. Proof that even in a fleeting life, some roads of kindness never fade. The seasons turned quietly, and before Keanu realized it, a full year had passed since the day he stopped on that California highway. Life had carried on new projects, long filming days, brief interviews, but every so often, his thoughts drifted back to Walter. The memory never faded. It had simply settled into his heart, like a song that played softly in the background of his days. One crisp morning, as Keanu sat in his backyard with a cup of coffee, his phone buzzed. The name on the screen made him smile. James Pierce. Attached was a photo and a short message. The image showed a small garden just outside Golden Haven Assisted Living. Sunlight glowed on a polished bronze plaque that read, "Pierce Garden of Memory, dedicated to those who never stopped finding their way." Beneath it were fresh white roses, arranged neatly in a circle around a wooden bench. The bench bore an engraving of Walter's name, alongside Margaret's. In the background, a few residents sat together, enjoying the morning air. The message from James was simple. Dad's story still helps people find peace. Thank you for stopping that day. Keanu stared at the image for a long time, his chest tightening with quiet pride. It wasn't fame or recognition, it was legacy. A moment born from instinct and compassion had grown into something lasting, something that had touched lives far beyond what either of them could have imagined. He typed back a single reply. He found his way home and helped others do the same. Setting the phone down, Keanu looked toward the open road beyond his property. The morning light shimmered over the asphalt, the same way it had that day on Interstate 10. He hadn't ridden that stretch since, but now it felt like time to return to see where it all began. A few hours later, his black motorcycle rumbled softly to life. The familiar hum filled the air as he fastened his helmet, zipped his jacket, and set out down the winding streets of Los Angeles. The wind rushed against him, cool and steady, carrying the scent of the ocean even miles inland. When he finally merged onto the highway, traffic was thick, horns blaring, engines roaring. Yet through all the chaos, Keanu felt calm. He kept to the right lane, eyes scanning the familiar landscape, until the exact spot appeared a wide shoulder bordered by a guardrail and a small patch of grass. He slowed, pulling over just as he had 1 year earlier. The car zipped by, the world moving fast as ever. But here, the moment stood still. He turned off the engine and let the silence fill the space between noise and memory. The same stretch of road, the same hum of tires, the same rush of wind. But everything was different now. Keanu stepped off the bike and removed his helmet. For a long moment, he just stood there, breathing in the rhythm of the highway. Standing there, Keanu could almost see it, the ghost of that afternoon frozen in time, the sun blazing above, the horns blaring, and an elderly man, standing frightened in the middle of the lanes, clutching a crumpled map as the world rushed by. It played in his mind like a scene without sound. The memory was so vivid that for a second, he half expected to see Walter step out from the blur of passing cars, smiling that same uncertain, grateful smile. Instead, there was only wind, whispering through the grass along the shoulder. Keanu crouched beside the guardrail and placed a single white rose against it. Its petals trembled from the passing gusts of speeding traffic, yet it stayed upright, delicate, but steady. He looked out over the road, speaking softly. "You made it home, Walter. And you helped more people than you'll ever know." For a while, he just stood there, lost in thought. He remembered how Walter had looked at him in that diner, hands shaking over a slice of pie, recounting the story of his wife as if she were still alive. He remembered the carousel, the laughter, the letter written with trembling hands. He remembered the quiet dignity of an old man who refused to let memory define love. Keanu thought about how fragile everything was. Fame, memory, life itself, and how kindness was the only thing that never aged. A car passing by honked twice, and when Keanu looked up, he saw a motorcycle group ride by in the opposite direction. Each rider wore the same white rose emblem on their jackets. The sight brought a small, knowing smile to his face. The Memory Ride project had grown far beyond him, now living its own life out on the open road. He gave a short nod of respect as they passed, feeling something inside him settle, an invisible thread connecting that moment to everything that had followed. After a while, he put his helmet back on and swung a leg over the bike. He started the engine, but didn't leave right away. Instead, he sat there, letting the rumble fill the silence. The cars streamed past in both directions, rushing to somewhere, just as they always had. But for Keanu, time had slowed again. He whispered one final time, "Thank you, Walter." Then he eased back onto the highway, merging with the flow of traffic. The wind hit his face, cool and steady, and the horizon stretched ahead like a promise. For miles, he rode in silence, the rhythm of the road steady beneath him. The city faded behind, replaced by open sky and the shimmer of the ocean beyond. As he approached the coast, the setting sun painted everything gold. Keanu smiled inside his helmet. He knew he hadn't just helped an old man find his way home. Walter had done the same for him. He had reminded him that compassion still had power in a world that rarely paused to see it. And as the highway curved toward the sea, Keanu felt peace at last, knowing that somewhere between the roar of engines and the whisper of waves, kindness had found its way home too. The sun dipped low over the Pacific, painting the horizon in gold and deep violet. The road stretched endlessly, glowing beneath the last traces of daylight. Keanu parked his motorcycle by the ocean's edge, where the breeze was soft and the world seemed to pause. The hum of the engine faded, leaving only the sound of waves brushing against the rocks. He removed his helmet and rested it beside him, looking out at the sea. The smell of salt hung in the air, calm and familiar. A white rose, slightly wilted from the day's ride, rested in his hand. He turned it slowly, tracing the edge of each petal. He thought about the year that had passed, the faces, the laughter, the tears. The hundreds of riders who now carried Walter's story across the highways of America. The families who had found their loved ones again because someone chose to slow down, to look, to care. Keanu closed his eyes for a moment, hearing Walter's voice echo gently in his mind. If you ever forget where you're going, just follow the sound of love. The words resonated differently now. They weren't just advice, they were a way of living, The kind of truth that stays when everything else fades. As the waves lapped quietly at the shore, Keanu spoke softly, almost like a prayer. Sometimes, we're so focused on where we're going that we forget who's standing still beside us. The sentence lingered in the wind, drifting over the water. He knew it was true not just for Walter, but for everyone who rushed through life, too busy to see the stories unfolding at the edge of the road. He stood, walked closer to the water, and gently placed the white rose on the sand. The tide crept forward, touching its petals, then slowly carried it out to sea. For a long while, he stood there watching the rose drift farther away, its white glow fading against the blue. And in that simple act, one small gesture of remembrance, he felt connected to every life Walter's story had touched. The horizon blurred in the distance, where sea met sky, and Keanu whispered into the fading light, "You showed me what home really means." The ocean breeze grew cooler as night approached. Keanu stayed still, hands resting in his jacket pockets, the waves stretching endlessly before him. The sky deepened into a soft indigo, scattered with early stars. It was quiet now, just the distant rhythm of the tide and the occasional hum of a passing car on the coastal road behind him. He thought of the thousands of people who had watched Walter's story unfold online. The ones who had written messages. The ones who had changed in small ways because of it. Some had started visiting their elderly parents more often. Others had volunteered at memory care centers or joined the growing memory ride chapters in their towns. One act of kindness had created a ripple that reached farther than anyone could trace. And yet, Keanu still believed that the truest part of it all wasn't what the world saw. It was what happened in between the silence, the patience, the moments when two souls met by chance and decided to walk the same road. If, only for a while, he picked up his notebook from the ground beside him, opening it to the last page. The wind tugged at the corners, fluttering the earlier notes he had written, fragments of thoughts, words about love, time, and loss. On the final page, he wrote one last line. Kindness isn't a gesture, it's a direction. He underlined it once, then closed the notebook gently. Behind him, the faint sound of a motorcycle engine echoed down the road, a pair of riders passing by, white rose patches glowing on their jackets in the fading light. Keanu smiled faintly, watching them disappear around the curve. The world kept moving forward, but somehow, compassion was beginning to move with it. He slipped his notebook back into his jacket and walked toward his bike. Before putting on his helmet, he looked out over the ocean one last time. The horizon shimmered, reflecting the last streaks of orange light, and in that glow, it felt like every soul he'd ever met. Walter, Margaret, his mother was somewhere out there, watching. As the music swelled softly in the background, Keanu's voice filled the moment, calm and sincere. Sometimes, we're so focused on where we're going that we forget who's standing still beside us. The sound of the ocean overlapped his words. Images began to fade in the highway at sunset, the crumpled map resting on the dashboard, the carousel spinning under golden light, the care home garden filled with white roses. Then the shot of the rose drifting on the waves returned, floating freely under the night sky. Keanu's voice continued, quieter now, almost like a whisper carried by the wind. Maybe life isn't about how fast we move. Maybe it's about the moments we stop long enough to care. Because somewhere out there, someone's lost, and your kindness might be the road that brings them home. The screen faded to black, replaced by the final words in white letters. Be kind. Someone's lost moment could be your chance to bring them home. The music softened, leaving space for reflection. After a pause, new text appeared on screen. Gentle, inviting, sincere. If this incredible story touched your heart, share it to remind others that compassion still lives among us. Then came the final call to action. Warm and personal. Have you ever helped a stranger find their way? Tell us your story in the comments below. Your words might be the light that guides someone home. The scene lingered for a few seconds longer on the sound of the waves, before the video ended not with applause or fanfare, but with silence. A silence filled not with absence, but with peace. And somewhere beyond the screen, as viewers sat still in their own homes, they felt it too, that quiet reminder that kindness, even when unseen, never truly fades.